Welcome, everyone. Happy Wednesday again. Thank you so much for joining us on every Wednesday for our Pacific Division Sheltering Capacity Building series. My name is Yiwei. I'm a volunteer and I'm from the Los Angeles region. I'll be your host throughout this series. You're currently muted. We're going to start off with a question. Unfortunately, I apologize. I could not get the poll to work. So Alan and the team will type in the question and you're able to use the chat. Later on through the session, we're going to unmute you so you can come off mute as well. If you have any questions or any comments, you can put your comments in the chat and you can put your questions in the Q&A section. This session is being recorded and it will be posted to YouTube later on tonight. The recording links and also the slides will be available on the documents that I shared earlier this afternoon. So without further ado, let's welcome Alan and Laura. Alan and Laura, both of them, they're our Pacific Division sheltering co-leads, and both of them, they're mass care chiefs for our Pacific Division. And I'm going to turn to Alan and Laura.
All right. Thanks, Yue. Appreciate that. We're both going to come off camera, and I think the first thing I would say is that this presentation is going to be a little bit different than maybe some of the others. It's going to be very interactive. So everybody start to just prepare for your interactive abilities, and we are hoping to do some polls and a few other things, but most of that's going to be done in chat. So I am Alan Underkoffler. I am the co-lead with Laura on the Pacific Division Sheltering. And I do a lot of things, mass care, as well as operations, and I'm super excited to be here with you tonight.
Hi, I'm Laura Houghton, same Pacific Division Sheltering Lead, and also, as with Alan, many other day jobs in our local territories and regions. So glad you could join us tonight, and let's get started.
All right, so our first question for you, and I'm going to put it in the chat as well, is what does sheltering as a team effort mean to you? So I'd love to this then to have been a poll where we have a word cloud. So just imagine that you're seeing a word cloud right now with all those answers. But what I'd like to see is type in chat, what does sheltering as a team effort mean to you? So these are starting to come in, which is great. So integrated effort, a coordinated integrated effort is great. Linda said respect. Karen said all have equal value. Working together to benefit clients best is a great answer. Working together, housing people in a safe place. No person in the shelter, it takes all to work together. Diversity, working together. Help for disaster victims, all groups working together. Many hands make light work. I love that. Safety, consistent and care for our clients. Temporary home for those displaced. Volunteers who show up prepared to work. Thank you, Jane. Teamwork, raising the mission, partners working together, lots of working together. Common understanding of processes. That's great. Any other selective ones you want to mention, Laura, that you're reading?
They all look great. Everyone has a part. I think that's great too. Working together to care and provide a safe place for the clients.
Flexibility is fantastic as well. So I think the biggest thing that we hope that you take away from this presentation is that it's the responsibility of every single person in the shelter to make sure that our shelter clients and our shelter workforce have a positive experience. It's not just the shelter site manager, or it's not just that shelter supervisor, it's everyone, all involved. Anyone that's in the shelter should be knowing that it's their responsibility to make sure that there's a positive experience happening at that shelter. Hi, Laura.
So looking at who is part of this team, We have lots of resources that are lots of people in the shelters that are all part of the team and part of making our job easier. We talk about the shelter event-based volunteers. Those are people who may not have ever worked in a Red Cross shelter. They don't have experience in most cases, but a lot of jobs that we have don't necessarily need a lot of experience. So if we can give them the basic bones of what they need to do, they come with compassion, they come with skills, knowledge, abilities. If we just set them in the right direction and give them guidance, they are a big part of our team. And again, if we make a positive experience for them, then they hopefully will come back and want to volunteer with the Red Cross more, and see the Red Cross as a valuable part of their recovery in their community. Hopefully, they'll become donors too, as well as volunteers. So part of your team is your EBVs, your shelter essays. Um, a lot of people in this group might be a shelter essay. We have a lot of them. Um, you individually are part of the team, as well as part of your team are all the other essays. Again, they all come with different experience. They may have worked at shelters in the past. They may not have, but they bring other experience. Um, and and it's just great to figure out what everybody has to add to make a great experience in the shelter essays. I mean, the reason somebody asked me the other day, why do I deploy? I love the people that I work with, and it started off as shelter essays. You meet these people and they're wonderful. Makes you want to come back and do more. Part of your experience in the Red Cross has to do with your supervisor. Um, your supervisor may or may not have had experience in this position before. A lot of times we may not have uh, the right number of supervisors that we need. So being flexible, if you're the supervisor, if we ask you to be a supervisor, um, it's great when people do press their ability or their comfort level within a job. But you as a supervisor, you have a big impact on the essays. The shelter site manager, we there are kind of our first level of escalation and expertise for stuff that's beyond the day to day. The normal stuff that happens in a shelter. If there's a crisis or if there's some, tricky situations, we have resources. We have our shelter site managers, who's maybe managing that shelter and maybe other shelters. And then we also have our headquarters shelter team. There's always people here to back us up. And whatever we don't know, they're resources to get us answers and to make our job um, run well. What else, Alan?
Yeah, and I would just add that, shelter EBVs are like the highest potential new volunteer. Laura talked about, also potential donors, but if an EBV has a good experience as a shelter team member, if you're able to have them have a good experience, they could be one of our most valued volunteers a year later, right? And so that's kind of what I like to think about. And I know, we've talked about these roles in many of the sessions already this season or this year, and definitely in previous sessions as well, previous years. But it's just really important to think about that. That shelter essay, that client-facing volunteer, they are the person a lot of times that are going to have is going to be whether that client has a positive or negative experience is going to be directly related to their interactions with a shelter essay. That's a powerful position to have. You are the first person a lot of times that when they walk into a shelter and they're looking for a safe place to be, it's you that is going to give that to them. So it's really important to think about that. It's a very valuable position. And that shelter SV position that we're constantly asking for more supervisors. We have such a huge need for supervisors, right? And I always like to ask, has anybody ever had a bad supervisor in Red Cross, right? You've gone to a DR, And you welcome to raise your hand if you want to, so we can see if anybody's, because maybe I'm the only one that's ever experienced this, right? A bad experience, a bad supervisor, bad interaction, just didn't gel, maybe didn't know doctrine, it just was a chaos, whatever, right? If you've ever experienced that and you're not a shelter supervisor, then I encourage you to work towards being a shelter supervisor, because if you become that person, you get to ensure that maybe the next rotation or the next shelter you go to, that for the people that show up at that shelter, that they have a good experience. And you're also the conduit to that person, that shelter SA, having their mission moment. They're having that positive emotion that makes them, that moment that makes them volunteer in the Red Cross for life, right? That's a very powerful position. So it's not just about paperwork. It's not just about supervising people. It's about being the conduit to allow somebody to have a mission moment that makes them a Red Cross volunteer for life. And we need more people that are committed to Red Cross for life. It's really important. The shelter site manager is an equally important role. They're the ones that are making sure that the mission of that shelter, that the what we're trying to do as an operation is happening within the shelter. Super important role. That's just another shelter supervisor that's raised their hand and said, ideally, has raised their hand and said, I want to take a little bit more training and learn what it takes to be a shelter site manager and get that specialty track that allows them to have that. Now, all of these roles, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, you may be a shelter SA that gets field promoted to a shelter SV because that's what the need is. And the same thing happens at that shelter site manager level. But the big thing to remember about this presentation and about going into your next shelter is that if you're ever field promoted into a position, and you're in that shelter, whether it's you that's being field promoted or you're another person that's in that shelter and see this happen, it's your responsibility to make sure that person's successful, right? You want to do everything you can to make sure that that field promotion for that person is successful. So if you're an SA that's gone to 25 disasters and sheltering like the back of your hand and you know how everything should be, it's really important that you don't necessarily tell people what to do or what they're doing wrong, but you help them be successful. That's the key thing. What else, Laura?
That'll help them help them learn, and also kind of going under the assumption that not everybody's gotten all the training that they need to do their job. So I don't think, one of the things that I love about working with Red Cross people is they all have such great intentions. And just working together and making the assumption that everybody's doing the best they know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a lot of people that raise their hand to volunteer their time, travel across the country, go into a not so ideal sleeping environment sometimes, and give 2 weeks or 3 weeks of their life if they don't have something inside them that wants to do something for somebody else. They have a giving heart, right? I think everybody comes in to a shelter or to a DR with a hope and the desire, at least I believe, to help people. And so sometimes when we're in a shelter and things are not going well, or we're not gelling correctly, or things are not, or maybe a little bit dysfunctional, it's important to realize or to remember, at least for me, that everybody's coming here because they want to support one another. They want to support their fellow human in this crisis they're going to or going through. And if when I kind of redirect my thoughts back to that, it seems to make everything that might be happening in a shelter that's making me twitch a little bit go away, right? Because I know that everybody's coming from the same place. So I know we've talked a lot about, in sheltering world, we talk a lot about everyone is welcome. For me, it's one of the most important aspects of Red Cross. It's what attracted me to the Red Cross. The concept of everyone is welcome is really, really near and dear to me, really important. And I also know that we've talked about in these series, we've talked a lot about people that are experiencing houselessness, right? And coming into the shelter. And there's just an important reminder that everybody is welcome. And not all clients, but many shelter clients, when they come into a shelter, it's very possible that they've just experienced their worst day in their life. And so I've been told recently by many people that sheltering is kind of easy, right? Like it's not that big of a deal. There's not a lot of training that you really need to have. You could be a come to shelter essay, you watch a couple of videos, and it's not a big deal. But to me, it's a huge deal, right? Because to be that person that's standing up and welcoming somebody in when they just had their worst day, that when they just had a tragedy that's rocked their world, when they're still in that trauma as they walk into the shelter, and you as a volunteer or a staff member saying, I'm here to support you, I'm here to help. Let me get you to a cot, let me get you something to drink. And that's just a super important role. So the concept of everyone is welcome for me is one of the highest things for Red Cross for me.
Yeah, when I think of this too, it's everybody's welcome and they also have different needs. So how we make them feel welcome is to understand what their needs are, to really listen and try to accommodate whatever it might be, whether they have medical needs, whether they have different sheltering comforts. Some people come to a shelter, but they're really, they don't like to be around a lot of people. So how do we accommodate them? How do we accommodate the people who identify as non-binary? When we have male shelters and female shelters or male shelters and bathrooms, what do we do to make everybody feel welcome? And part of that, especially as a shelter essay and as a shelter essay V, but as a shelter essay, you're more likely to hear about those situations because you're in the closest contact with the clients. And you work with your supervisor and the rest of your team to see what you can do. Part of your team might be, working with the health services to figure out how you can accommodate this person who needs to be near a plug for their CPAP machine or something in the shelter. How do we make them, how do we use our team to make everything work for the client?
Yeah, and we obviously can't accommodate everything, right? So I've been asked for all kinds of things at a shelter. I'm sorry, I only drink Pepsi with all of my meals. And well, okay, I appreciate that. And you're welcome to go to the store and get Pepsi when it opens, but we have water, right? So some requests, you just can't accommodate everything. But when it
Yeah.
comes to what Laura is talking about, right? Like how do we make it a safe place for people? How do we create quiet places when there needs to be a quiet place for a client for whatever reason? How do we accommodate as much as we can on the feeding requests based on all the different aspects of what people can eat? And how do we ensure that we're meeting those requests, right? So as the responsibility of that shelter team is to make sure that they know their clients, they know what they could eat, and that we're providing meals that they can actually eat, right? Because that's an important element of sheltering, is that we're not only housing these people, but we're feeding these people, and they have to be able to eat what they can. So it's just really important to accommodate as much as we can, but then also know the limitations. We're not going to serve you Pepsi, right? So that's okay.
Yeah. Danny just put a good point in the chat, which I really like, is the the clients need us to listen. They need to get off their chest what their experience is like. And I think that's where we hear lately a lot from national headquarters talking about we need to be not just transactional, we need to be transformational. Instead of just, worrying about getting them a cut, maybe just sit there and listen. They need to tell that story before they can move on to the next part of their recovery. So thanks, Danny. I really like that. A lot of times when you're working in a shelter, especially in the very beginning, you're not going to have ideal conditions. You're going to end up with an empty room. If you're lucky, you're going to end up with an empty room and some bathrooms and maybe a couple small rooms. And you're going to set up cots, you're going to set up a feeding area and a registration area, and you're going to have the very basics. What your building is like, we have so many different situations. We've identified during steady state uh, shelters that we might want to use, and they could be impacted by the disaster. So what you're left with is, it might not be ideal. I was just in Guam and they'd never sheltered before, and they didn't have any buildings that were suitable for shelters. The shelter we set up would would be horrible in most conditions, but what we had to start with, it was the best we had to start with. And we did whatever we could to make it as good as we could. So we're especially in the first couple days to a week, you're going to be working under chaotic situation. A lot of times you might not have a number of staff that you need. You might not have the supplies that you need. They haven't gotten the logistics track kind of working quite yet, their regular deliveries. Um, so situations are going to be crazy. The meals, until we maybe get a feeding partner in there and figure out what meals are, a lot of times it's kind of crazy. So what do you do in situations like that? So one of the things that I think of is, when you decide when to deploy, you you kind of need to know yourself. You need to know whether that's a situation you really like, and you like that kind of the craziness of the beginning of a disaster, or if you like it, things a little calmer, coming in the second or third wave or fourth wave, depending on how big it is, things then will settle down. So, so first, knowing where your comfort level with chaos, I think, is one thing that makes a successful deployment or not. Um, Making the best with what you have. You may not have everything you need, and to help your clients, but you're going to escalate up um, to get those things that you need. Whether it's, I need shower trailers. We don't have, we have a building, but we don't have any shower trailers. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 days to get all the services that you need to work in in a more ideal shelter. You're going to have, you might have people that really make the job challenging. Um, and you figure out the best way to work with them and figure out what works for sometimes people, you sign up as a shelter SA and you realize, oh, I really like doing this part rather than that part. So you work around people, or working, not around, working with people to figure out where everybody can work, and how they can work together to be successful. And by staying positive and working as a team, you really can make a huge impact on the clients and your own personal experience. And then remember the mission, why you're here. We're here to make these clients, to help their recovery, to give them a safe place to be, to give them their basic needs until they can find their next situation, after the disaster, settles out a little bit more. So, leading by example. When it's especially in the very beginning, when the shelter is a little bit more chaotic, learning to kind of take charge on the things that you can, knowing what you can take charge and what you need to escalate up. So figuring out how to work better, um, and lead by example, being nice, being kind, saying kind words, um, being the person who raises your hand, said, yes, I'll help with that. You know, we need to do, we need to clean the bathrooms every day until we get a janitorial service. Nobody, honestly, nobody really wants to do that, but somebody's got to. And sometimes you have to be that person to just say, sure, I'll take that, knowing somebody else has to do it again tomorrow. So, Alan?
Yeah, I think, Laura shared a really valuable gem that deserves to be said again, which is that knowing what you like, right? If you don't like high stress situations and chaos, going in on the first week of an operation is really not for you, right? Like you should know that. Like it might sound exciting, but if you get stressed out easily, if you like things really organized and all in place and all the forms perfect and all the supplies you need and everything is kind of like just working smoothly, you should probably never go to the first week of a disaster, right? Because it's just not going to be a good experience for you. But if you do have all that things where you like things kind of orderly and systematic and the paperwork all cleaned up, going in on that second wave could be huge for you because you could be that person that you see the leftover chaos from the first week or two, and you start going in there and systematically getting things right and correcting things that may have been missed, and getting everything organized, and then you have this really wonderful experience because you put the shelter back on track, right? And then if you like things just slow, like I just want to just chill and be slow, going in on that third wave of a disaster, when the shelter's been open for a month, 3, 4, 5 weeks, that could be ideal for you. That would be, and the thing that's really amazing about Red Cross volunteers and the Red Cross opportunity is there's literally something for everyone, not just in sheltering, but across the board. So knowing what you like, what is it that's going to really make this be a positive experience for you, and then go in during that time. I think that was super powerful. It's just know what works for you and go with that.
And I think the other part of that is not making the assumption that the team that was there before you did a bad job because things are a mess. Almost every DR I've been on, everybody's like, I came in and it was a mess. Well, yeah, because the situation you were working in is totally different than the situation that the person who was there before. So have pride in improving it, but try not to blame the situation or the people who are there before you.
Yeah, I mean, as shelter workers, when we go into a shelter, we're working with what we have, that building might not be ideal. The environment around the building might not be ideal. The city that it's in might not be ideal. The shelter clients themselves might not be ideal. The workforce might not be ideal, but we have to just work with what we have. And then always circle back to the mission. What are we trying to do? What is our mission in the Red Cross? Why are we here? And do the best you can. And Laura said, sometimes it takes 3 days to get supplies to a shelter, especially in the beginning. But when you, as a supervisor or a shelter site manager, if you say, I need showers, and you don't hear, and the next day there's no response back on how that's going, that conversation with your shelter site manager or the sheltering manager at headquarters should be, I still need showers, right? And that third day, it's like, still need showers. And it's not about that sheltering manager is not doing their job or not listening to what you need. It's that sheltering manager at headquarters is getting hit with needs on a minute by minute basis from all across the board, right? So it's really important that once you identify a need, that you just keep bringing it up with your supervisor. Hey, we still need this. We still need this. It's not a bad thing to remind people that you still have a need to be able to meet the needs of the clients, right? But a lot of that stuff seems to go away once you're in that 3 week range, that 2 to 3 week range. Things have figured out. We've got good shelter sites. We have facilities. We've moved shelters a few times if we needed to get into the right facility. All those things happen, and it's just important to work with what you have. So we're going to talk a little bit about high stress environments. In case you didn't realize, sheltering is a high stress environment. You'll have people coming in that have all kinds of needs. Some of them complex medical needs. Some of them are complex mental needs. Some of them are experienced trauma, massive trauma. They just watched their house burn down, or they just lost a family member. There's just all kinds of things that happen. Maybe they've been through something like this before, And so it's triggering all that trauma from a previous experience. And that client is presenting themselves in the shelter with all of these things. So that's just clients, and the workforce could be just as stressful, right? So you have a shelter worker that's brand new to the Red Cross, has never deployed before. They went through all their training, they got their gap. They're like, I raised their hand, I'm ready to go, I want to volunteer, I'm looking forward to doing something. They get there, and just the experience of a new volunteer getting to an actual shelter the first time is pretty stressful. Because if you think back on your first deployment about all the unknowns that you had, right? You thought you kind of knew what was going to happen. Then you got to call for flights, you got to arrange that, you got to show up at the airport, and then you may or may not get picked up at the airport. You may or may not get a text that says what you're supposed to do next. You may have to figure things out. All of that is super stressful. So your workforce that's coming in, your fellow shelter clients or shelter workers, could be extremely stressed just by that experience. And it might take them a day to kind of like snap out of it and realize what they're here for again, right? So that, we talk about like, you hear all the time, first impressions mean the biggest thing. Well, in sheltering, first impressions from a workforce perspective may not mean everything, right? Because we're all coming in with whatever journey we had to get there. And some of us may have had delayed flights, all kinds of things could have happened. So that's just really important to think about and keep in mind. So that's on the workforce side. And then, Laura talked a little bit on the last slide about needs, like, needs for shower trailers, needs for laundry trailers, needs for IDC. So health services, mental health services, spiritual care. These are needs that our clients have. And sometimes you're in a disaster and an operation where we don't have enough disaster health services people to get to a shelter. We don't have enough mental health members to come in and talk to our clients. And it may take 3 or 4 days for them to get there, or a week or two to get there, or they may be rotating from shelter to shelter and they may not be there all the time. So those create additional stresses within your shelter. And then feeding's a big thing. Sometimes feeding is like spot on, perfect, solid food, really great experience. And other times it's not so great, right? And so you gotta work with that, and you have to communicate, right? So there's nothing better than a feeding manager that's hearing back feedback from the shelters about the food. It's not coming in on time. It's coming in cold. It looks and tastes like something from a horror movie, right? So whatever that might be, but it's really important to communicate what you're getting at your shelter so that feeding manager at headquarters can start making adjustments, can change the vendors, can have that conversation to improve it. Because in our world of mass care and Red Cross, I've seen horrible situations in shelters and feeding go from horrible to amazing in a few days. And so it's just about making sure that we communicate. And then the other part of the high stress environments is, that some of those clients just may be experiencing some really overwhelming issues that you have to deal with. And that goes back to moving clients around, to making accommodations for some clients. I mean, I've had clients that, I remember a volunteer at a staff shelter that was so loud in their sleeping that they slept in the hallway outside, right? We made an accommodation for him, but also for all the other volunteers in the staff shelter, right? So you just have to kind of think out of the box on some of those things and make those happen. What do you think, Laura?
All of the above.
All of the above.
I also wanted to let you guys know that we're going to be talking about some of these specifics, feeding and IDC, some of those more next week. So we're not going to go into those as much today. They'll be covered on the next session. Actually, it's in 2 weeks, I think. We're taking next week off. So, do you want to go? I want to get to our interactive part. So I
want to just address a couple things. So what is IDC, Laura?
Individual disaster care.
And
Did I get it right?
Yeah, I was testing you, yeah. And that is disaster health services, disaster spiritual care, disaster mental health. It also includes, help me out.
Spiritual care. Is
Well,
that
spiritual care, but also disability integration,
disability
right?
integration?
Yeah, so that's what IDC is. And then somebody mentioned, I think it was Maria mentioned about night shifts. So I was thinking about high stress environments. So, sheltering is a 24-hour game, right? And when you show up to be a shelter worker, you don't get to pick what shift you're going to get, and I always, like to ask shelter workers as they're coming in, do you prefer nights? Like that's one of the questions I always ask because there is a certain percentage. I would say 25% maybe is my running number, 25% that actually prefer to work nights. And so always identify those people at headquarters so that you could get them at nights. But sometimes you're going to have to work nights. That's just part of the game. That's what the shelter needs. That's what the operation needs, and that's going to create another stress for you. And it's going to be an adjustment. But I promise you that if you commit to working nights, that you're going to have a good experience as well. And many people like working nights because they get more interaction with clients. They're there during the night. They come in after work, and there's more interaction, so they actually enjoy it. So that's one of those things. And I also would say that at headquarters I know that myself and many sheltering managers, HQ sheltering managers, make a valiant effort to not have somebody that doesn't want to work at nights do their whole duration working at nights. There's a point where we try to shift them back to days, like kind of spread that out, just like you would do if I was a shelter site manager and nobody was going to clean toilets. We had no janitorial service, and I had to kind of have that, talk with the group and say, hey guys, we're not going to have any janitorial service, and we need to clean toilets. So we're going to do a rotation. We're going to do morning, and we're going to do afternoon cleaning of all the bathrooms, and I'm going to take the first morning right now, right? So that's leading by example. That's being a good leader, and that's what we should be doing. The same thing with working at nights. If we could make it work, and it's not always possible because there's a lot of chaos at headquarters and a lot of moving parts, but if we can make it work, we should try to shift people to do that. And that's a fair request for you as a volunteer to ask too. If you don't want to work nights and you're put on nights, say, I would love for people to say, I do not like nights, but if that's what you need, I'm happy to do it. It would be really great at a weekend if you could switch me to days so I can work days before I go back home. That's a fair request and also a really positive response to somebody that doesn't want to work nights. We do want to mention one other thing before our next question is that high stress environments also include stuff like norovirus, right? So if you ever have an illness go through your shelter, that creates a high stress environment, right? Having volunteers that aren't taking their times off, like their days off, creates a high stress environment. Having shelter shifts that are coming in for a 12-hour shift, and then you have a couple workers that stay for an extra hour or two and then go. So now they're working 14-hour shifts. That's also not ideal and creates a high stress environment and creates stress in general. So those are things that you want to think about as not only as a shelter SA, but as shelter SV or shelter site manager. All those are really important. You want to lead this one, Laura?
Yeah, I was wondering, can we come off mute and make this interactive?
We can. I think we can. Correct me, Yue, I think we have everybody that has the ability to come off mute, or they will soon. She's going to make that happen, I think, if she's
They
here.
will soon. I am doing that as we speak.
So what I'd like to do, though, is instead of having people try to talk over each other, is to do like a raised hand, so we can kind of do it in order. I think that might be a little bit better, but I like the idea. We talked about this a lot, Laura and I. We agree that working with teams in general, like any shelter team you go into, it's going to be super easy. You're all going to get along. It's going to be great, and you're going to have a wonderful experience. But what if your team members are hard to work with? What do you do when you feel like you're not working well with your team? That's the question. So who wants to answer that? Who wants to come off mute, maybe raise their hand and give us some suggestions on what they might do to handle that?
I see Julie had her hand up, but I also see she's on hold. It may not be related. Julie, are you available to talk? Okay, let's go to who.
So the first one is like Melita. Melita?
Yeah, hi. I would say just learn people's communication styles and meet them where they're at with that, and just treat everyone with respect. Don't take it personally if someone's having an off day.
I agree.
Yeah,
I think people don't, they don't try to be difficult.
taking things personally is like really hard because I think it's a trait that we all have at some level, right? So, but realizing that it's not personal is a big thing. I like that a lot. Red Cross Stockton Client Services. I don't know who that is, but I like your name.
Michael Sechrist, California Gold Country region. Basically, what I would do is I would go to the supervisor, let them know what's going on, how I feel about it, and basically follow their suggestions of how to proceed from that point. And if that doesn't work, then I'll go back and talk to the supervisor again. Uh, it it may be something that can be corrected or not, but either way, as an SA, it's not my job to fix that one. It's my supervisor's job to give me the tools I need to do the job.
Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes you can't fix that person. Oftentimes you can't, or you might be able to help that situation, but if it's not, sometimes it's knowing that maybe it's you, that it would be easier to transfer yourself to a different spot than to confront a difficult volunteer if it's not working.
I absolutely agree. And I would have no problems going somewhere else if I'm not getting along with another volunteer.
Right. Scott?
Scott.
Hi, Scott. I haven't seen you in a while.
It's been a while. One of the things I guess that I've really learned and, being straight up with expectations. Unfortunately, I've been on several DRs where, when they were deployed, especially to nice areas of California or Hawaii, they thought it was a vacation. So, when can we go to the beach? When can we go to the beach? And there's an expectation that, this is not a vacation, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah. And realistically, sometimes those people, depending on how bad it gets and how willing they are to engage, they might get sent home. We would work with staff services, but if they're just not willing to work, if they think it's a vacation, they might not be here. So,
I like that.
Julie. Julie, are you able to take yourself off mute?
Julie
No, it
Myerson,
won't let me.
there you
Hi,
are.
it wasn't letting me get off mute for a while. You guys were asking about what was part of IDC, and another thing was ICC, the International, the Condolence Care Team.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I wasn't able to unmute at the time, so that's why I raised
No
my hand.
problem. Yeah, no problem.
Yep,
Sherry.
Muriel?
Oh, Muriel.
There we
Hi.
go. Am I unmuted finally?
Yes, you are.
Hi, I'm from the San Diego Imperial County group, and I'm kind of a recent supervisor. And a lot of what people have already said is very true, and is understanding where your group is at. Like, how long have they been SAs, and what have their previous jobs encountered? Because sometimes you come from different places and expectations truly are different. And so I try to make mine objectives for the particular shelter very clear. And then if I find them having difficulty, I say, is this a job you're uncomfortable with? And I do try to tell them, let me know if you're not uncomfortable, or if you're uncomfortable with the situation, let's find a different area. One time I had a guy that was a smoker and he had to go outside, which is fine. But however, he didn't come back for a half hour, 45 minutes. And I simply sat him down and said, I don't mind if you take a cigarette break, but I kind of need to know where you're going and when, and it should only be 10 minutes. And so I clarified my expectations and I didn't have trouble again. So it wasn't confrontational, it was just informative, and we moved on. So if you can meet your essays for where they're at, I think leads to much better experiences for everybody. And definitely, as someone said, if you're an SA and you're having a problem, let your SV know. Let them do the dirty work.
That's
That's
great,
my
Mariel.
comment.
I like it.
Sherry Curtis.
Same thing. But for me, honesty and straightforward go a long way. So if I perceive something, if I'm getting, difficulty from someone, I'm going to take them aside and say, hey, this is what I'm perceiving. Am I wrong? Are you, do we have an issue? And give them the opportunity to tell me about it from their perspective. That can really go a long way. Like Muriel was saying, people appreciate it when you're straightforward with them, and maybe you're misperceiving what they're doing or why they're doing it. So that's my policy.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, how often have you had the experience where you have this feeling that somebody doesn't like you, or is being snappy with you, or is angry at you, or whatever, and it really just comes down to, however, sometimes it comes down to me as the person receiving whatever is happening and having my own stuff in my head or my own conversation I just hung up with, and being completely wrong about what's happening. So asking that question of, this is what I think is happening. Is this accurate? Is this what's happening? Is really powerful. So pretty cool.
Kit
Hit.
Schneider.
This may be off topic, but it's something that's been on my mind. As somebody who has gone from SA to SV, promoted on the job sort of thing, I always appreciate it when I get an evaluation, especially in the beginning, I really did, because they would tell me, what I did right, but they would also suggest things that I could do or learn about or take more classes about. And I know lately, and it's happened multiple times, and I've talked to other SAs and SVs who've experienced this, it's no longer required to do an evaluation. And I'll tell you, from the aspect of somebody, any of us who've gone in and worked our butts off, you feel kind of like nobody noticed if you don't get an evaluation of any kind. And I'm not asking about kudos, but just an acknowledgement that you were there and not just another body. You had a name and you had a job, and you either did it well or you could use improvement. How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm really glad that you made the comment. I'm going to step out and say evaluations are a requirement, and just end that rumor now. So if anybody has heard that evaluations are optional, it certainly is not on any DR that I'm on with anybody that I'm supervising. And I'm actually, I will get on my supervisors and make sure they're doing it, and I will stop them from doing any of the work until they complete it. I'm pretty adamant about 100% evaluations. And some, and
so glad
just
you
kind
said that, because it's
just
not
kind of like
happening.
yeah, just kind of like what you said, Ken. It's like, hey, I've put in my 2 weeks time. Can you put in 20 minutes on an evaluation? Like, I think that's a fair exchange. There are situations that happen where, for whatever reason, there's maybe an error with the system. Maybe for whatever reason, somebody has 30 people that are, they're supervising because it got screwed up, maybe in volunteer connection or workforce, or never was put in the right person. So there are some exceptions to that where things just fall out. But to me, it's a requirement. What about you, Laura?
Oh, definitely. And I know that there is a way that if you do not get an evaluation, you can go through staff services and request it.
Laura,
Everybody should be doing that.
Say, even when that happens, The evaluations aren't coming.
Yeah.
And I'm not just speaking for myself. I'm really not. And again, it's not a complaint. And I realize that my supervisors, when I'm a supervisor, are busy, and they're volunteers too. I'm not expecting. I guess when you take the responsibility of a position, I think it should be at least one of the important things. And I've done evaluations 2 days after I've gotten home, but I've gotten them done.
Yeah.
One of the other things that I have noticed is because we do them now through Volunteer Connection, they go from the person who wrote it to their supervisor. Sometimes it gets stuck there for a couple days, and then it automatically goes into your Volunteer Connection account, and you might not even know that it's there. So I know that's not all of the situations, but that is one thing. Your supervisor should be having a conversation with you, so it should never be an issue whether it's there or not. But sometimes with the electronic system, it can get onto your record and you wouldn't even know that it was there.
And also, as a volunteer, don't be afraid to talk to your supervisor and say, hey, I'm leaving the operation in 2 days. I want an evaluation. When can we schedule that to look at it? Put a little pressure on your supervisor to make sure that it gets done. Before I leave this operation, I want to see that my evaluation is complete. We've had a chat so I can learn what I can do better next time, what I can improve on, what I did right. So I think that's a fair question to ask any of your supervisors. Ideally, that supervisor's doing that on their own and has already got it in place and has already talked to you about your evaluation, but not all supervisors are the same. We do talk about evaluations pretty heavily throughout all of our training, that they need to be done. And there are many job directors out there that look at evaluations, that see what percentage of evaluations are being completed, and will start hounding their ADs and their activity managers and their supervisors to make sure they're done. So it is something that I think across the board, from my experience, that we're all paid attention to. We do know people go without evaluations, and at least in this group, I think many of us are very adamant about doing evaluations. So we're going to move on to the next question, though, I think, at this point. Is that okay?
Yeah. And if anybody else has any comments, feel free to put them in the chat because they're all valuable.
Yeah. So we have 2 more questions left, so I think we should get through them. We're going to go with Robin first, and then we're going to go with Linda. So go ahead, Robin. It's not really a question, it's really answering the question, right? What do you think you do when you feel you're not working well with your team, was the actual question that we started with. What do you do when you feel you're not working well with your team? Go ahead, Robin.
Okay, well, what I think is I always try and leave people better than I found them. A reaction to a smile, just redirect, doing things like that can and reevaluate the situation can always calm it down.
Yeah. Nonverbal, definitely.
Yeah, I like it. And then Linda, you put your hand back down. Did you have one for us?
I kind of want to direct this comment to people that are supervisors and site managers, because we can prevent a lot of these situations from happening. One of the things is to, be aware, be looking for those, taking the temperature of your team. If you see cliques forming where you've got people, that's a good idea to move people around and not have them work every day with the same person. One time, actually on my first deployment was doing some recovery work, and I was sitting next to another volunteer who was just very, persnickety. I'm gonna have to tell you that she had to line up the pens on the desk in a certain way, and if I moved a pen, she was very upset. And I didn't say anything, but the supervisor noticed this and came over and asked her to take another position somewhere else. And so I think as supervisors and site managers, we can do a lot if we're paying attention to these things.
Yeah, I think that's part of the role as a supervisor, right? Like you're looking at your team, you're seeing who's working well together. You're also thinking about their future deployments and you're moving them around the shelter. You're making sure that they understand all the different activities in the shelter and how it works and getting a little bit of experience in all of them. Like that's just great supervisory skills. So I think
And this usually happens after week 2, after
yeah.
week 1.
Yeah, so I think we're going to move on. I just want to reiterate some of the things that I wrote down initially was that learn the communication style of the person you're talking to, go to your supervisor and ask for suggestions. I thought that was really good. Be straight up with the expectations. I think everybody appreciates that. But sometimes that comes off a little bit rough. So sometimes you need to think about that before you are straight up with your expectations to make sure that that you're just coming out in a softer way if possible. And then realizing that some people are on their first deployment, some people have been on 20 deployments, and just knowing who you're working with, I think was really good. And I'm always a big proponent of honesty, so I think that's really good. There's also some exceptional comments in the chat. So I encourage you to kind of circle back on the chat and look at some of those too. I think that would be really good. So we're gonna briefly talk about this, working with others within the Red Cross. I think that the next session, right, Laura, is going to talk a little bit more about this in general. But you know, when you're in it, and we've talked about this in some of the other parts of the series, is that you know, you have all these different aspects within a shelter and things that are coming together. But these are some of the different people you're going to work with, and you know, and one of the things that I would say is that, you know, as a shelter worker, everybody should have a warm welcome, right? So you have your clients that should have a warm, friendly welcome. You have your fellow workforce that should have a warm, friendly welcome when they arrive at the shelter. Hey, Laura, great to see you. I'm so glad that you're here. Let me show you around the shelter, right? That's a warm greeting at a shelter. You have fulfillment team members, you know, that are from logistics that are coming in to give you supplies. They should have a warm welcome at the shelter. They should be, you know, if you have a new fulfillment person there and you're talking to them, you should learn their name, talk to them, see how they're doing. How's the DR going for you? That's a warm welcome. Same with your feeding people that are people that are dropping off your food. You want to make, I mean, if ideal world, people want to come to your shelter just because that group is so friendly, right? The clients are cool, the workforce are cool. I want to support the shelter, and it's going to benefit you if you do this. You have that SRT team that may be in your shelter, depending on where you're at. That shelter resident transition team. There's an interesting thing that I heard. I don't know. I think it was in the last week or two. But imagine an SRT worker. You're a shelter worker, and you check in people at the front desk. You hear their stories, and you interact with clients throughout your shelter. An SRT worker at a shelter will hear 30 possibly really horrible stories in one day, right? 15 in one day, over and over again. That's all they hear. That's what the SRT worker's doing. And then they're trying to help that client move to that next step in their recovery. That's a lot. So think about that. So all of our other people that work within our shelters, we have stresses as shelter workers, but there's also a lot of stress that we don't have to deal with that some of our other people, our team members are dealing with within the shelter itself. Same thing with our disaster health services or disaster mental health services people. They're literally talking to people every single day, the entire time of their deployment about sometimes positive things, but a lot of times just where people are at, what happened to them, and trying to help them in their recovery. And then UDM is another thing that's just kind of fun in shelters that we all enjoy, and how to deal with that. But when people come with those donations or whatever, it should be a positive experience. When visitors come, if somebody from the state or county or local jurisdiction, another Red Cross volunteer that you're not familiar with, it should never be a, who the heck are you and why are you here? That's not a warm welcome, right? A warm welcome is, hey, Linda, thanks for coming. My name's Alan. What can I help you with? Oh, okay, you're the HQ sheltering manager coming here to visit. That's great. Let me show you around. Let me get my shelter site manager. Let me introduce you, right? That's the way it should be for all of us. And it's something to kind of remember. In the high stress of shelter work, especially in that first week or two, we get, I at least personally get caught up in that. There's so many things to do and there's so many people coming at you, but sometimes we forget that the client's most important, and stopping and having a conversation with that client's more important than the 10 things you have to do. And sometimes you need to call somebody else in, one of your team members, to say, you start the conversation with that client, or you start the conversation with somebody, and you might pull somebody in to support you, and then transition that conversation to somebody else so you can move on, right? I think we're going to talk about this at some point, but also just for the heck of it, since I brought that up, that when you see a shelter worker having a challenging conversation with a client or another person in the workforce, feel free to step right up in there and be part of that conversation, to diffuse it, to offer a different perspective, to separate. I think that's really important as a shelter team member. That's one of the best things that you could do. Be supportive of your other team members when they're having challenging conversations or interactions. Should we move forward, Laura?
Yeah. Yeah, when you're working in a shelter, we've talked about a lot of Red Cross people, but there's a lot of people outside of Red Cross that are part of our team, and that we need to make sure that that we're working really collaboratively. A lot of times, we don't have enough health services or mental health services on site within Red Cross, to be able to cover all the needs of the clients. And plus the county health services is there anyway, and they would offer their services, but those people are invaluable partners because we could not do the whole job ourselves. So when they come in, they're part of our team, and we greet them. We invite them to sit down and eat dinner with us if we if we have a chance to eat dinner. Um, we do whatever we can. We exchange information with them. Our team that's on the ground will integrate with their team where it's appropriate. Um, so working with all these partner organizations, visitors, especially in the very beginning of a shelter, you get a lot of people. You've got people from the press, you've got people from all these organizations. They're coming in, they're offering services. I don't know how many times I've been at a shelter, especially a big operation, that people will come and they'll offer free haircuts, they'll offer to play music, they'll offer food, there's very specific things about food which we can't do, but once things start to settle out again, offering some of these things to our clients helps them recover, helps them settle down. Sometime we very often have worked with people to set up an area that they could have. They can do haircuts, and the clients love it. I've seen them come in and do massages. Different services like that are for the clients. Everybody wants to help, and that's what some of these people have, some of our partners have to help, and they want to offer. So we find a way to work with them. We get a lot of times visitors from different organizations, different government organizations. We need to know how to deal with that. When do we need to escalate it or not? And your supervisor is often the person who might be able to help with that. But if you're working at the front desk and registration, great time to interact with a lot of people, and to really practice your great customer service skills. Another partner organization I think it's one of my favorites, is all the people will help with our pets. We've had co-located shelters, and the local pet organization comes in, and they basically do the same. I've seen them do some of the same things that we would do with our clients. They make a registration form, they make sure they have food, they make sure they have water and a safe place to be. you know, they don't have a cot, but they'll separate them. They'll figure out how to service our pets so we can feel comfortable, so that their owners can feel comfortable too, that they're taken care of. So then the owners will be able to go take care of themselves without having to worry about their pet. These are all partners that we can't do this big effort of sheltering and taking care of thousands of people by ourselves. So these are all of our, these are some of ours. Can anybody else think of other organizations or things that they've seen on DRs that they thought were great partners and how we work with them? Let's see. I don't see my hands up.
Beauticians.
Who is it?
Beauticians.
Yes. Was that you, Robin?
No, but I'm on now. No, I was going to say that you get feeding people in there. Not only do sheltering, I do feeding, but you get feeding people, you get military in there, you get government officials in there. And what really helps, I think, is people go out and they take the 2 sheltering classes or 3 sheltering classes or whatever it is now. And they stop there and they start going out to Red Cross. But the Red Cross offers a whole line of classes, and you shouldn't just stop at the 1 or 2 beginning ones, because they have classes in how to deal with other people in your shelter. They have classes in having to deal with, problems in your shelter. And people just don't take these classes. And yes, they get bumped up to supervisors, but they're not trained and they're not ready and they're not prepared. And that's usually, I'm now a manager, that's usually where you see things crash and burn. People are unprepared. And they aren't prepared mentally. They're not prepared physically. They're just not prepared. And by the way, night shift is the best shift to have. Just for you know, love night
I love
shift.
that.
It is.
All right.
Night shift is great. Anyway, take more classes is my answer to all this. Red
Thanks,
Cross
Robin.
offers 1,000 classes, it feels like. And every time you finish, they come up with new ones.
That's true.
So I think
Yeah.
the big thing on Robin's comment for me is that if somebody's not prepared to be a supervisor, they're in that role. Remember, sheltering is it's a team effort, right? And if you're at that shelter and you're that SA, or maybe you're a supervisor, and for whatever reason you're not the supervisor at this shelter, it's your responsibility to support that person, to make them a good supervisor, to help them to become a better supervisor, to point out, hey, Laura, maybe we should put some more cots down. There's 10 people waiting for them, things like that. It's all about how you make that suggestion. Maybe we should have a visitor log so people coming in, can sign in, right? Really important. So a lot of our shelter essays, in my opinion, could do great as a shelter SV. They make a decision for whatever reason to not be an SV, but they have great wisdom, they have great experience, and sometimes it's just a matter of kind of pointing that out a little bit. Danny, did you want to add to some of the partners as well?
Yeah, the only thing I was going to add, and I did put in the chat, when I was in Guam, I had 40 Marine and Navy personnel come in, and all they wanted to do was help. And so I had only like maybe 10, 15 minutes to come up with 30 or 40 jobs for them. The point is that no matter what needed to be done, everyone kept raising their hand, and it was a godsend. I mean, they helped out in anything and everything you could possibly imagine in their shelter, and it was great. So not just, them, but there are many, many other partners that the Red Cross deals with. And in sheltering, I think take advantage of it, because it's very helpful in the shelter, but you also learn from it, and it will help you in future DRs that you go on.
Awesome.
That's it.
Great, thank you. Actually, Jill just brought up a point I saw in the chat. She said another partner is our migrant forums in your area, or immigrant agencies. That makes me think that one whole area that we haven't even covered that are very valuable partners are all of our faith-based or different ethnic organizations that serve a certain population. And they might know the best foods for their people, where you can get them. They might be able to offer services or whatever works for their particular need. But they're great partners too. So I want to move on to the next section. I think one more section. I'm cautious of time. And I think this is our
Yeah,
last.
and I think maybe we skip this, raise your hand, since we did that on the last one. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right. You want to
Did you
take
get
this,
this
Laura, or you
one?
want me to?
You can get the first one.
Yeah, okay. So what do you do when things are not working? So I think some suggestions on things, approaches you might take. And I think we've already heard a ton of really wonderful suggestions from your sheltering community, right? From your fellow shelter workers that are on this call right now. But one thing to keep in mind is to keep it within your chain of command, right? So it's really important that if you have something that's not working, maybe it's an interaction with a client, a fellow worker, maybe it's a doctor, an issue, whatever, that you try to keep it within your chain of command. You go to your supervisor, right? And you'll hear a lot of that in Red Cross, how important it is to go to your supervisor. And then also to not share negative experiences with everyone. Share it with your supervisor. There's a great trait that, we should always complain up, and what is it, Laura? Do you know what I mean? Like, in a nice way of saying it, but basically all complaints should go up and everything positive should go down, right? So that's the gist of it. But you don't want to have those negative experiences shared with everybody. And this really comes into play when you have a local disaster, right? You have a local disaster, you open a shelter, maybe things don't go ideally. Maybe things go poorly, maybe things go great, but you share a negative experience with multiple people within your region, and it just kind of spreads and percolates, and it's just not ideal. Not something that you really want to do if you could prevent it. If you're having issues if you're still having issues, maybe you're having an issue with your supervisor, or it's not seeming to go anywhere. Working with the workforce is really important. Working with staffing is really important. They have a lot of great tools to help you get through some situations if you need it. We've talked a lot, and many people have complain up, praise down. Thank you, Douglas. I like that. That works. So complain up, praise down. I love it. But show kindness, right? And give grace, right? So we talk about kindness a lot in the Red Cross. It's not just a word. It's actually something that you should think about every time before you open your mouth, right? That's what I should do. Like every time I think I'm going to say something, I say, is this going to come out kind, or is this going to come out snarky, right? If I could change my tone and say the same thing, is that going to create a better experience? Somebody said earlier that they try to leave somebody feeling better. What I got out of what they said is they try to leave somebody feeling better than they were when they arrived, right? Having them a better positive experience. That's a great trait to try to do. It's really hard because it means that you're constantly aware of how the person is that you're talking to versus yourself. And so that's really hard to do. But if you're able to do it, or you try to do it more often, then you're really showing that kindness, and you're giving grace to people that may have a bad day, that may have a bad interaction. They may have just got off the phone with a partner that lit up on something that they didn't like, or whoever, or maybe they called back home and just had some really poor news, right? So giving grace to people with wherever they're at, I think is really good. Taking a step back to evaluate the situation. So there's no reason why, if you get into a bad situation, or you feel, talked about, earlier, like Sherry talked about, like the perception is that this is happening, right? There's no reason why you can't take a step and go, you know what, I'll be right back. And you go out and maybe do a couple laps around the shelter trailer, get some fresh air, walking back and forth across the parking lot, maybe have an interaction with the clients instead, change your whole perspective, and then come back and deal with that situation. That's a great solution to try to kind of reevaluate what's happening. And then analyze the situation and focus on actionable steps, right? So if all those things aren't working, you could always go back to staff services and start working on that angle to try to make a change if you need to. So as shelter workers, volunteers, we have lots of opportunities to turn a poor experience or not ideal experience that we're having to a better experience while we're still deployed, so that when we come home, we feel empowered and energized instead of maybe the reverse.
Yeah, I always try to remember when in situations like that is to also kind of check myself. What did I do? Did I come off a little snarky? Maybe I shouldn't have said it quite like that. Or is that what they said? That may be the words they said, but I shouldn't assume that they had ill intent. It may have just been, it just came across that way. Check your stress level. Check what else is going on with you, so you are making sure that you're not making things worse without knowing it. I don't think actually anybody makes things worse knowing it, or most people, but it's easy to say that person, or to think that that person did this. But sometimes I know I have to take personal responsibility for my part of the situation. And just sitting back and listening and thinking, oh, okay, how can we do this differently? Because what's our goal? It's service to the clients. And sometimes you have to bring somebody else in to help find that solution. And remember, the other thing is your coworkers are a very valuable resource in thinking of other ideas or helping work out a different solution. So I think on the next slide, we also have, yep, here we talked about staff services. So having a face-to-face conversation with a person, using the I statement instead of saying you did this, how do you use an I statement to I feel this when in a certain situation. Alan, you're good at examples off the top of your head. I forgot I didn't think of examples. You're great at
I
that.
feel, I see, I heard, all of those things are really great.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
and so it doesn't come off as a blame. Ask your immediate supervisor for help. If your supervisor isn't available or is not, or maybe your supervisor is the issue, you can always escalate it to staff relations. We talk about staff relations, where we find the staff relations, there's a phone number in the IEP. And usually in the very top section of where they list a directory of names and numbers. IEP is the incident action plan. And
and when you're on a DR, you get that every day. You should be getting that in
yeah.
your email every day.
So it has valuable contacts in there. I usually, I don't print it off every day, but usually when I get to a DR, especially, if you're in very the beginning and you haven't figured out who everybody is, I print out the contact roster only, just to have it available. But that's where you can find the staff relations people, and they can help you by listening, by coming up with creative ways of looking at things and possible solutions. And if it still is not working, we have a whole senior management team that we could escalate to if we need to. But I haven't seen almost any situation that staff relations would work with operations management to come up with a solution. So they're all here to help you. And the more we figure out how to work around the problems, the more we can have a great response by there's always those little things that kind of bother you. If you can get rid of that stuff, then you can really enjoy the people, the clients, the service, feeling proud of what you've done, and feeling just energized by being able to help the clients and seeing them and feeling their appreciation. That's what, if you're ever, that's another suggestion. If you're ever having a really hard time another staff member, go talk to a client. You know, their their day has usually been a lot worse than yours, and you being able to help them will make some of the other stuff seem less important. So
Yeah, I love it. And staff relations usually is in person, depending on the size of the DR. So they may be virtual, they may be in person, but there's always somebody in workforce, and you're always welcome as a volunteer to call whoever's on the IAP in workforce if it's not staff relations and say, how do I handle this? And they should know what to do. So that would be
and
my
in the
recommendation.
shelter, the mental health people are also available to help us.
Yeah,
They're not just for the
absolutely.
clients. If we need them, they'll be there for us too.
Yeah, and we've talked about in some previous series, I'm sure it's been mentioned before, but when you have on the DMH side, disaster mental health side, if you're supervising people or you're part of a team and you have something happen that's traumatic, or maybe it's a client that just really loses it and just dumps on a volunteer, right? And it's just horrible. And you see it, you witness it, you support your fellow worker, you talk to them, you recommend they call a DMH, right? But I'll tell you what, that most people, and maybe I shouldn't say that, a lot of people, you recommend that they call DMH, they'll say, yeah, I'll do that, and they never do. There's been many times in Red Cross that I've called DMH and said, hey, Laura just had a really challenging conversation with a client. It was really upsetting, and they basically just threw up all over her. And I know she's probably not going to call you, but can you just reach out to her, just check in, see how she's doing? That's supporting your fellow team member, right? That's really important. Same thing as taking your days off, right? There's many of us that just don't take days off on disasters. And usually at some point, somebody will tell you, it's time for your day off. And that usually means that your ability to manage your your inside thoughts or your reactions is being lost, right? So it's just an important reminder. And sometimes that's another way of being supportive of your fellow teammates. It's like, hey, Alan, you've been going for 12 days, and I think it's really probably a good time for you to take a day off. That should be a clue that I'm probably not reacting as well as I should be on situations, right? If I hear that from Linda, I know that I've probably gone too far on something and I need to make an adjustment, right? So that's pretty important. So your resources are your direct supervisor. We've talked about that. Many people talked about phone a friends. I think it's really great if you're new to your role as a supervisor, that you utilize phone a friends. That could be, for instance, maybe it's your regional sheltering lead, and you have a conversation with them and say, hey, I'm going out to my first DR as a shelter supervisor. Can I call you if I have questions because I don't want to look like an idiot, or because I have questions because my supervisor's not helping me, or if I just have questions, right? I think that's really important resource. But I also want to say that if you use a phone a friend and you get some feedback to do whatever to make changes, it's also super important that you still report problems to your supervisor. So if there's an issue that's happening in your shelter and you don't know how to deal with it, and you phone a friend and they give you some tools to deal with it, you still need to communicate above to your supervisor so that everybody knows what's happening in your shelter. So I think that's really important because sometimes that gets lost in there. The sheltering toolkit on OneSource, it's a huge opportunity for you to really dive into doctrine and learn all kinds of things about sheltering. Everybody should read that every day. It's not going to happen. So, but sometimes it's nice to just go in there and kind of see maybe how things should be based on how it was written. And just keep in mind that some of that doctrine is a little dated, right? Some of it hasn't been updated in a few years or more, and some of those things have changed. So just keep that in mind. And then asking another volunteer, asking another teammate, hey, Laura, how do I do this? How do I set up this cot again? Because this cot's different than ever I've seen before. You know, it's okay to ask for help or ask questions. I mean, that's what we're all here for. Any other resources that you want to mention, Laura?
Not that I can think of, but I'm sure we have a lot of creative minds in this room.
Yeah. So I think that if you have a creative resource that you think you might want to mention to the group as a whole, I think putting it in chat would be helpful. I think everybody appreciates that. Maybe you'll throw something out there that we haven't seen. We are going to be wrapping up here soon. Do you have something, Laura?
Nope, I just saw that Robin has had her hand up, so I wanted to.
Yeah, so I want to give I know I see that too, Robin, but I want to make sure that we give it back to Yue for a minute, and then we could stay on for additional questions. So just the last thought on this presentation is to remember the mission. When you ever feel like you're not gelling with your team, you're having a bad experience, things aren't working out, people aren't listening to you, you're not getting that evaluation, any of that stuff that could happen in the world of deployments and in the world of sheltering, just remember why we're here. We're here to prevent and alleviate the human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of you, our volunteers, and the generosity of donors. That's why we're there. We're here to alleviate the human suffering. And sometimes just reminding yourself of that brings everything back into a clearer picture. And just makes things easier, just like Laura suggested, talking to a client. So with that, I want to make sure we give Yue some time, and then I'm happy to stay on to answer a few questions. I'm sure Laura is as well.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you so much, Laura, for taking time off from your busy day. I'd like you all to put in the chat that if there's anything that your takeaways for this session. I'd like to share my takeaways. My takeaway for this one specifically for the end of the fiscal year is giving grace to everyone else and also to yourself. We have multiple training events going on. We have multiple events. And we have multiple fires and disasters that we all know. So give yourself grace, and that's the best recommendations and offer that we can. Alan, do you mind for us to answer one question in the Q&A section? That we have a question that, as a supervisor, is there any way that we can print out the evaluation form and discuss with the essays?
I would have to try it. I've never tried to print it out from Volunteer Connection, but I'm sure it's possible.
Well, thank you. So before I forget, again, this recording will be posted later on tonight on YouTube, and all the slides will be ready tonight as well on the link that I sent you earlier. We're going to take a little break for next week. We're going to resume the following week. I believe that was July the 10th. And we're going to talk about how to work with different other functions for the sheltering activities. And I'd like to turn back to Alan and Laura to close us off and to answer any questions that people might have that we still have several raised hands.
Thank you for everybody who joined us. I realize some people need to drop now. Thank you. And we hope we value your feedback and love the fact that we were able to do an interactive session and get the experience of all you people who have deployed and have great words of wisdom for those of people who might be doing it for the first time.
Yeah, and Robin still has her hand up. So Robin, if you have a question, we're happy to answer it. I'm not sure if you just, yeah.
Well, I'm here still. Okay.
Robin?
There's two Robins.
Oh. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
I
Go
heard
ahead.
Robin.
Go ahead, Robin C.
I am so sorry. I did not mean to walk over you. That was rude.
No,
I have
you're fine.
things. One is a question that's a little off topic, but you might know the answers. How do you go about, I just got promoted to manager, and I'm trying to get him to put that in my volunteer connection file. How do I get that to happen? I've asked my DPM, I've asked Erica, who is our operations person. She doesn't know. Anybody know? Is there?
I happen to do workforce engagement also, so I can work with you offline on that. This is Robin Cohen, right?
Yes, Robin Cohen.
Okay.
I would appreciate that because I worked so hard to get there. Now that I'm there,
Yeah.
Robin, just to answer
Yeah.
your question real quick, manager levels are approved by the division, and usually RMS, the Resource Management and Mobilization Unit, they're the ones that will add to your profile. So does not belong to the region, does not belong to the DPMs or the RDOs, the RMS team, the division team, the Patrice team. They're the ones that adding to your profile. So if they've already notified you that it has been approved, chances are it's already reflected on your volunteer connection under gaps.
It isn't. That's the problem. And they said, oh, it'll be a month or two. It's been more than that. And, I don't know who's supposed to be doing it, but I was notified that I am now a manager. And what they said is, we'll try it. And if it's not there in a couple of months, talk to your DPM.
Okay, Robin, Laura and I can work with you offline. And since Robin, we're in the same region, I can definitely support you with that. Do we have any other questions before we close? I think I see another hand. I see Deborah Burnson. You want to come off mute?
I was just wondering, Yui, if we could have you create these for other groups than Mass Care, please. These series are wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I think that's a great suggestion. Yue should bring that to some of the other activities. I'm sure she'd love to do them.
Yes, we did one on feeding.
I know, they're all great. I mean, they're very helpful if you're in another group as well.
I've attended some previously for external relations, so I know that they've done them, and I know logistics has done some as well, different series. So I think they're out there. But I think if you're in a different activity and you think that these are valuable, there's no reason why you can't suggest that to your activity lead in your region and ask them to bring it up to the activity lead in the division that you're in, if that's specific, and see if we can get something like that together.
And Yui has a touch about these.
Yeah.
Yui might be at capacity at the current moment with the fiscal year ending and multiple things coming up. And I want to thank you for a kind word. So we're 2 minutes past the time. Thank you everyone for joining us. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Safe 4th of July weekend, and we will see you in 2 weeks. Thank you for all the presenters and all of your support. See you in 2 weeks.
Appreciate you.
Thank you.